The date was December 16th, 1940-4. The Ardennes forest lay buried under a blanket of deep, unforgiving snow. This sector was known simply as the Ghost Front. It was a quiet place where green American troops were sent to rest and gain experience. These men were already exhausted from the summer's brutal fighting. The morning air was sharp and frigid. It promised another silent dawn. Then, at 05:30 hours, the silence was violently ripped apart. This was Hitler's last great gamble, the offensive codenamed Wacht am Rhein. It exploded across 80 miles of front lines simultaneously. The sound was far more than mere artillery fire. It was the noise of the entire war starting anew, a maelstrom of death and destruction. The German plan was audacious and ambitious. It relied entirely on speed, surprise, and the swift collapse of unsuspecting American lines. However, the forces driving the northern spearhead, the 6th SS Panzer Army, were often shells of their former selves. Units like the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division were hastily rebuilt. They were filled with inexperienced personnel, older veterans, and raw replacements grimly called refreshments. These men were ill-suited for a major offensive. Crucially, they lacked sufficient heavy weapons and adequate winter gear. Their initial deployment proved to be a logistical disaster. They were rushed via lorries and then forced into a grueling foot march. Many men were exhausted before the first shot was even fired. Hauptmann Heinz Fick, commanding a company in Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9, noted the constant American artillery bombardment. His unit moved out on December 12th, covering over 60 kilometers in 3 days. He wrote that the troops were exhausted and ill-equipped for the winter conditions of snow, frost, and icy roads. This delayed arrival and utter physical depletion meant the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division missed the initial, crucial phase of the assault. They were already struggling against the elements and their own command failures. Yet, where the German offensive hit, it hit with devastating power. The initial barrage, followed by the order to attack at 0600, instantly pulverized the perceived calm. It struck the US 99th Infantry Division and the 14th Cavalry Group sectors. The initial German gains were unexpected. They caught Allied forces completely off guard. The immediate fate of the northern shoulder rested on a few isolated, outnumbered American units. These men simply refused to break. Nowhere was this resistance more critical than at the road junction of Lossheimer Graben. Here, the green US 394th Infantry Regiment faced the full fury of the crack 6th SS Panzer Army. The Germans expected a quick rout. Instead, they encountered 36 hours of fierce, unrelenting defense. The battle for the road junction became a vital, desperate holding action. It was a testament to the fierce resistance encountered by the initially successful German advance. The 394th was eventually forced to yield the position, but they bought precious time for the subsequent American defenses to organize. This delay allowed task forces to mobilize, effectively denying the German spearhead the quick, critical breakthrough it needed. The initial German tactical success was not solely due to firepower. It was the element of surprise, coupled with calculated deception. Skorzeni's Einsatzgruppe Greif inserted infiltrators deep behind the lines. Some of these operatives were wearing American uniforms. They cut telephone wires, misdirected traffic, and spread false rumors, paralyzing command and control. The confusion was immediate and profound. One German officer was even observed mistaking American armor for his own unit, illustrating the cascade of chaos. The surprise was total, and the deception was highly effective. The American command structure fractured for a few terrifying hours. The front line was gone, replaced by desperate, isolated pockets of resistance. Men were fighting for their lives in the swirling snow and the sudden, terrifying roar of Hitler's unexpected war. The German offensive depended on a lightning-fast advance. It immediately ran headlong into the determined, desperate resistance of the few American troops guarding the northern shoulder. The 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, already exhausted and critically short of heavy weapons, launched its assault into a hellish spectacle. At Lanzerath, the I&R platoon of the US 394th Infantry Regiment held the line. They fought from well-prepared foxhole bunkers covered with 6 to 8-inch pine logs. They had created a final protective line with interlocking fields of fire. As the paratroopers advanced at 600 hours, Oberschütze Rudi Frühbeißer watched the scene. He described the enemy territory ahead being bathed in a chilling, milky white light. This artificial moonlight was created by hundreds of American searchlights. The German assault, designed to sweep aside light infantry, instead met a wall of coordinated fire. The battle quickly devolved into brutal, close-quarters fighting. Despite the telephone lines being severed, a single radio allowed the defenders to communicate vital information. The intensity of the fighting was immediate and personal. As Slape tried to cross the road, an automatic weapon fired. It tore the heel off his shoe and sent him sprawling into the snow. McGee, Silvola, and Robinson were sent to assist their comrades. They were cut off, wounded, and immediately captured. McGee's calf was ripped open, Silvola was wounded in the elbow, and Robinson was taken at gunpoint. The 2nd Company of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 attempted to storm a section of woods. They suffered devastating casualties as machine gun crews were mortally hit and tank killer squad leaders fell. The fierce, unexpected resistance at Lanzerath immediately threw the German timetable into disarray. The 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division suffered severe losses in its very first hours of combat. It was a brutal testament to the paratroopers' inexperience and the tenacity of the American defense. Despite the costly delays, the German infiltration deep into American rear areas was swift and shocking. Early on December 17th, German forces reached Honsfeld. Honsfeld was a vital American rest and supply area. Walter Wittlinger of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 described driving into a scene of profound American unpreparedness. The town was seemingly peaceful, with jeeps and trucks parked. Their ignition keys were still in them, and their red lights were burning. This tranquility was shattered when Sergeant Creel of the 32nd Cavalry Group identified the approaching enemy. He identified them not by sound, but by sight. It was the chilling image of the swastika painted on the side of a German tank. The fight for Honsfeld was swift and brutal. German tanks and anti-aircraft vehicles, including Mobilwagons and Wirbelwinds, overran the center of the town. They engaged American positions at point-blank range. American units, including the 801st Tank Destroyer Battalion and elements of the 32nd Cavalry Group, fought fiercely. They managed to knock out several German tanks before the town was lost. The capture of Honsfeld was a major tactical coup. The Germans seized tons of materiel and disarmed over 100 soldiers caught in the surprise. Some of these men were sleeping in the hall of the Eiffeler Hof Inn. A decorated Christmas tree still stood there amidst the chaos. For Lieutenant Lyle Book's INR platoon, the chaos was intensely personal. They were cut off and encircled after their jeep was hit. Amidst the horror of the retreat, Book found the mortally wounded Sakar. Sakar's body had been devastated by a German burp gun burst. In a moment of profound humanity amidst the war's indiscriminate brutality, Book made a promise. He told Sack he would see him back in the States. Bauk placed a picture of Sack's girlfriend and a small Bible on his chest before being forced to leave. Carlyle was severely wounded by a rifle grenade that miraculously failed to detonate. He received expert first aid from Redmond. The remaining men made the difficult decision to stay with their wounded comrades rather than attempt an escape. This sealed their own fate. Even in this isolated pocket, vigilance was required. Milosevic identified and neutralized a German operative disguised as a medic. The operative had been signaling for mortar fire just moments before the shelling commenced. The immediate American response to the deep penetration, however, was swift and adaptive. Sergeant Gallagher was captured by American-speaking Germans. He used deception to escape and provide vital intelligence. Gallagher confirmed that the Germans had already captured nearly all of Honsfeld. The realization of the scope of the threat triggered immediate counteraction. Ad hoc units were rapidly organized, showcasing the American ability to recover from surprise. Task Force Davison, a mobile reaction force, was hastily assembled. It was led by Lieutenant Colonel Henry L. Davison. The force was composed of elements of tank destroyers, tanks, and engineers. They marched through the snowy countryside with a clear mission. Their goal was to secure key areas and evacuate vital assets. They entered Waynes on the afternoon of December 18th. There they immediately began the evacuation of critical medical units, including the 47th Evacuation Hospital. Yet, as the Americans stiffened their defenses, the German offensive began to stall. It stalled due to its own inherent weaknesses. Paratrooper operations in the wider WWII sector were increasingly characterized by a critical lack of proper support. They had no heavy weapons, no tanks, and insufficient artillery. This forced the Fallschirmjäger, already depleted, into unsupported assaults against prepared American positions. The result was devastating losses. The assault on Bel Air on December 19th proved disastrous. The 3rd Company of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 advanced with only 6 mortars available. Gunther Meyer described the resulting carnage as murderous mortar fire. Heavy American artillery barrages turned the experience into hell. The forest where they assembled was obliterated by shelling. The fight offered no prospects against an unseen enemy. Meyer vividly recounted the chaos, the noise of battle drowning out screams, and the bloody withdrawal that followed. By December 20th, the 1st Battalion of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 had suffered 85 men listed as killed, wounded, or missing. The initial surprise had evaporated. It was replaced by costly attrition, forcing the German paratroopers into a brutal, unsupported war of inches. The initial momentum of the German offensive died rapidly. It died not in a single decisive battle, but in a brutal, protracted grind. This grind was against the unforgiving elements and the sheer weight of American firepower. By December 20th, the nature of the fighting shifted dramatically. The German advance, which relied on speed and maneuver, was now static. It was characterized by attritional warfare centered on small, pulverized villages. The primary enemy became the American artillery. Continuous, intense barrages marked a strategic turning point. They forced the German paratroopers from offensive action into desperate, defensive holding patterns. Faymonville, a key village, became the epicenter of this shelling. Paratroopers were forced to endure 12 hours a day pressed into earth holes. Relief was possible only under the cover of darkness. Any movement risked immediate targeting by mortar, rifle, and machine gun fire. The noise was constant, and the fear was paralyzing. The civilian population of Faymonville became collateral targets of this violence. By December 23rd, the town was ordered evacuated. 10-year-old Josef Pfeiffer described his harrowing flight with his family. They were caught directly in the American shelling. As trees toppled and carts overturned around them, his father urged them to take cover. A German soldier, hardened by the constant roar, shouted back the grim truth. He told them, "Shut up, that doesn't help anyhow." The roads were cratered, and the air was thick with the smell of explosives and wood smoke. German logistics had completely collapsed, forcing units to scavenge or starve. Hauptmann Heinz Fick, still leading his men, wrote home about the necessity of overwhelming the enemy just to survive. He mentioned capturing American supplies, including cigarettes and tinned fruit. Disrupted supply lines forced them to live off the land. He described the dire contrast between his men and his own brief, uneasy sanctuary. His troops were freezing in snowed woods and earth holes for days without warmth or food. Fick found temporary shelter in a detached house. 2 Walloon peasant wives and their 6 small children took refuge in the cellar. Fick and his men shivered in the rooms above them. The human cost was immediate and devastating. On December 21st, the 1st Company lost 21 men in a single day. Many wounded were simply abandoned. The overwhelming artillery fire blocked any recovery efforts. The men, wounded and exhausted, relied heavily on the dedication of Dr. Walter Kahl, the staff doctor. Kahle had initially preferred a combat role. He established his dressing station in a mining corridor. He dedicated himself fully to his medical duties. Kahle earned the respect of the soldiers for his bravery and calming presence amidst the chaos. Even in the depths of this shared suffering, moments of profound, desperate humanity emerged. On Christmas Eve, despite the ceaseless thud of artillery, a makeshift celebration took place in a cellar. Soldiers shared precious, scavenged alcohol. With throats hoarse from the cold, they sang Silent Night, thinking of home. This provided a poignant contrast to the destruction surrounding the monastery of St. Raphael. The monastery served as the main aid post, filled with wounded men requiring immediate operation. The grim reality of the German offensive was that it was not a seamless, coordinated blitz. It was a series of desperate, fragmented assaults. This was brutally confirmed when a planned attack on Faymonville by Fallschirmjäger Regiment 5 was abruptly cancelled. The order came down because the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend had failed in its own sector. This failure exposed the Fallschirmjäger to an unsupported assault. The continuous shifting of orders and the unsupported attacks exposed the failure of the German command to adapt to American resilience. As the losses mounted, the only solution was to feed the front with new blood. Inexperienced replacements, the grim refreshments, were poured into the depleted units. This underscored the desperate attempt to maintain fighting strength. The narrative of the battle had moved far beyond grand strategy. It was now a testament to the unbelievable endurance of individual soldiers. German paratroopers and American infantry alike struggled against the cold, the hunger, and a relentless fire. They were locked in a brutal, attritional struggle for every house and every frozen patch of ground. By the second week of January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge had ceased to be a German offensive. It had calcified into a desperate American counteroffensive. The objective was no longer halting the enemy. It was eliminating the deep, dangerous salient the Germans had driven into the Allied line. This task demanded an advance through deep snow and across frozen ridges. It meant fighting into fortified villages, where the German Fallschirmjäger fought with a tenacity born of desperation.
The resulting combat was brutal and attritional.
It was measured in yards, costing the Americans some of the highest casualty rates of the entire campaign. Thirimont became the crucible of this new phase. After the initial American penetration, the battle devolved into fierce house-to-house fighting. The town was a maze of strong points. German paratroopers utilized cellars and mutually supporting machine gun nests. They turned every structure into a fortress. American armor, essential for breaking these strongholds, was systematically hampered by mines hidden beneath the snow. The 743rd Tank Battalion alone lost 15 tanks to these unseen killers between January 13th and 15th. The American infantry navigated the fog and the constant threat of small arms fire. They found communication lines cut and their units isolated in the chaos. Lieutenant Robert S. Warnick watched his G Company dwindle. The company went from 163 men to 84 in less than 2 days. He realized his troops were encircled in the godforsaken village. They were fighting for survival from room to room. The German response was swift and equally costly. At dawn on January 14th, Oberleutnant Strasser was ordered to counterattack. His mission was to clear the town of American infiltrators. About 100 paratroopers, reinforced by 6 assault guns, plunged into the ruined streets from the east. The assault guns came from Sturmpanzerabteilung 217. The close-quarters engagement was a maelstrom of death and destruction. It was a brutal clash between determined American infantry and German units equally resolved to hold every inch of ground. Assault guns were knocked out by artillery fire. Infantry squads were obliterated by machine gun bursts. The 4th Company of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 suffered the highest losses in the town. They had 21 killed and 12 wounded. This was a stark measure of the price paid to defend a few ruined blocks. The fight for the high ground surrounding Thirimont was even more critical. Haute Sartz, designated Hill 551, was rightly described as the key to the entire Ligneuville sector. The 3rd Battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment launched its assault on January 15th. They struggled up the icy, snow-packed slopes under intense fire. The advance stalled repeatedly, pinned down by unseen machine gun nests. It was here that Technical Sergeant Monty W. Keener displayed immense bravery. He was leading a platoon pinned to the frozen earth before he was cut down. The American advance was ultimately achieved through individual acts of courage. Lieutenant William H. Calloway, for instance, flanked and destroyed a key machine gun nest. This action allowed tanks to finally move forward. By nightfall on January 15th, Hill 551 was finally captured. The victory yielded 87 prisoners of war. It was a crucial, hard-won victory that solidified the American hold on the area. As the high ground fell, the Americans began the systematic reduction of the fortified villages. Fimonville, which had endured weeks of relentless shelling, was now the target of a full infantry assault by the 16th Infantry Regiment. The town had been transformed into a bastion, a defense town of ideal specifications. To take it, the Americans systematically pulverized every defensive position. Lance Corporal Smiling Al Alvarez prepared for the assault. He meticulously layered his clothing and provisions onto his radio sled. He knew that warmth and energy were as critical as ammunition in the 40 degrees below zero temperatures. Private First Class Harry P. Pritz recounted his harrowing experience. He crossed a waist-deep swift river and then built a snow fort for protection. His feet were already frozen, and his gear was riddled with bullets. The battle was a testament to the sheer physical endurance required by the troops. The capture of Faymonville was accompanied by costly advances on its flanks. On January 15th, the 23rd Infantry Regiment pressed into Steinbach and Remonval. Lieutenant Covington's tank destroyers supported the attack on Remonval. They faced heavy machine gun fire through the swirling fog. They engaged German paratroopers entrenched in fortified houses. By January 16th, approximately 100 paratroopers were taken prisoner as Remonval and Ondenval fell. Rudi Frubisser of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 9 recounted the bitter fight near Ondenval that day. It was a fight marked by desperation on the German side. The following day, Clement Turpin of the U.S. 23rd Infantry Regiment experienced the terrifying reality of German armor. He faced a formidable Tiger tank, which he described as a monster coming through the woods crushing the pines. Despite hitting the behemoth 10 times with his bazooka, Turpin could inflict no damage. But the German paratroopers, though pushed back, were far from defeated. Their resistance was characterized by fierce, localized counterattacks that inflicted shocking casualties. The Battle for Chopin, which began on January 19th, saw American attacks repeatedly repulsed. The defenders were the combined forces of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 8 and 6. A particularly devastating German countermove occurred in a dense wood west of Chopin. A surprise attack by Kampfgruppe Schenk caught American soldiers completely unprepared, leading to a massacre. An estimated 150 Americans were found dead in the snow-covered clearing. The site earned the grim moniker, the Wood of the Dead. This single, brutal engagement underscored a key truth. The American advance was not a rout of a broken enemy. It was a bloody, yard-by-yard campaign against a foe whose resilience remained. Their fighting spirit endured, even as their resources dwindled and their command structure fractured. Chopin finally fell on January 21st. But the victory was measured only in the immense human cost paid by both sides to reduce the German salient. The German offensive, once a dangerous spearhead aimed at the Meuse River, had been blunted. It was stalled, and finally overwhelmed. The relentless American counteroffensive was fueled by superior logistics and artillery. It transformed the German defense into a chaotic, fragmented retreat. The structural integrity of the front line dissolved day by day under the weight of metal and snow. On January 24th, the loss of key terrain, specifically Hill 523, forced the immediate abandonment of Moderscheid. The Germans began a desperate fall back to a new defensive line west of Heppenbach. The deep snow, already the paratroopers' constant enemy, now became a logistical killer. Troops were forced to pack heavy equipment, bazookas and precious ammunition onto sleds. They were soon forced to abandon them in the hasty, disorganized flight. Communications failed entirely, leaving units fragmented and isolated. The situation devolved into sheer chaos on January 29th. Renewed American attacks pulverized the German positions at Holzheim. The retreat from the village was not a strategic withdrawal, but a complete collapse. All unit connections were instantly lost. Soldiers disappeared into the swirling white chaos. They were captured or simply swallowed by the woods. The fighting had been reduced to isolated acts of survival. The remnants of the German attack fought on pure instinct. The veteran Fallschirmjäger of Kampfgruppe Schenk had endured weeks of brutal attrition. They were now reduced to a mere 25 men. By January 30th, they found themselves entirely surrounded. They launched a desperate breakout attempt, fighting through the encircling Americans. The demoralized veterans and inexperienced replacements struggled against overwhelming numbers. They also struggled against unfamiliar American weapons. One silent killer many German soldiers had never encountered was the rifle grenade. Compounding their frustration, the crucial German anti-tank weapon, the Panzerfaust, required separate fiddly ignition cartridges. This led to technical failures and potential accidents in the chaos of close combat. Kampfgruppe Schenk, reduced to 16 men strong, endured a brutal march through knee-deep snow. They finally reached a moment of surreal respite in the leveled town of Schorenberg. There they received their first warm meal and sleep in days. It was a brief, profound moment of humanity amidst the war's wreckage. This reprieve stood in stark contrast to the final, futile stages of the German defense. The paratroopers of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 5 held Lossheimergraben for several more days. This was the very road junction where the entire battle had begun 6 weeks earlier. They finally yielded Lossheim on February 5th. This date marked the definitive end of the Battle of the Bulge for the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division. The division was broken. It was a cohesive fighting force shattered by attrition with immense casualties. Its remnants fought their way back toward the relative safety of the West Wall. The German army was forced into a retreat from which it would never recover in the West.
But the Allied victory came at a staggering price.
The Battle of the Bulge remains the US Army's bloodiest engagement of the war. It is a testament to the ferocious tenacity of the German defense and the sheer human cost of the conflict. For the German soldiers who survived only to be captured, the war ended with a final, ironic horror. Prisoners of war experienced the surreal and infuriating fate of being fired upon by their own artillery as they were marched to the rear. Frontline American troops often displayed fair treatment to their exhausted captives, but the men faced the humiliation of being filmed and photographed during their surrender. This was followed by harsh interrogations in the rear, marked by threats and uncertainty. The struggle for the Ardennes, fought yard by frozen yard, confirmed a profound truth. The war was not won by the grand strategies of generals. It was won by the unbelievable endurance of individual soldiers. The entire narrative of the offensive, from the initial surprise to the final collapse, was written in the suffering of men. Paratroopers and infantrymen alike, regardless of their uniform, shared the cold, the hunger, and the final brutal price of the conflict.
Their story moves beyond the history books.
It becomes a lasting testament to the critical role of individual units and their struggles in the maelstrom of death and destruction.